Hello，欢迎大家。首先提醒一下大家，
Hello, welcome. I would like to remind you that the event will be delivered in Mandarin, but we provide simultaneous interpretation for English audience. If you need the language service, please select the interpretation select bottom on your lower right-hand side.
We provide English translation. You can select the language channel from the interpretation button on your lower right-hand side. 感谢大家来到我们的活动。
Thank you very much for attending this event. My name is Guo Xiaofei. I am a PhD candidate at Courtauld Institute of Art. My research direction is the intersectionality between Chinese contemporary art and biomedicine, especially the gender and racial issues in these kind of art creations. It's a pleasure for me to be the moderator of this talk. Firstly, I would like to thank you for Queer Now. Queer Now was sponsored by Arts Council England and commissioned by Chinese Arts Now. Queer Now and this event were all curated by Whiskey Chow, and it was supported by CEACS at University of Nottingham as well as Mimosa House. If you are interested in more interesting online events, please go to our Instagram and you can go to Chinese Arts Now's website. This online exhibition will last till the 12th of June, and we will share many different new artists and their works with you. This event would like to build an open and warm space for people from different backgrounds to build a safe space to communicate. We do not tolerate any depictions and references to racist, transphobic, and/or homophobic comments. If we see any of these comments, the audience will be removed from the webinar. Now I would like to introduce the two artists. Xiao Lu is a very important Chinese performance artist. Her creative works included video, installation, and paintings. She lived in Sydney from 1989 to 1997, and from 1997 to 2020, she was back in Beijing and Hangzhou. Now she's back in Sydney. The most famous work of Xiao Lu was the work Dialogue in 2089, which was included in China Avant-Garde, organized by National Museum of China. She fired 2 gunshots towards her own work Dialogue, which caused the exhibition to pause. Her works experienced many different life stories of her own, from an independent female rebellious individual to an artist with a strong feminist awareness and social awareness. Her recent works include Democracies, Tate Liverpool, UK 2020, and her works were included in collection galleries 2070s to present, MoMA, UK, New York, USA, Skew, 10 Chancery Lane Gallery, Hong Kong, Xiao Lu Impossible Dialogue, 4A Center Contemporary Asian Art, Sydney. And in 2017, she also joined Theatre of World Guggenheim Museum at New York. Xiao Lu's works are one of the collection of major international public institutions, including Tate Modern, MoMA, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, the National Gallery of Victoria. Whiskey Chow is a London-based performance artist and Chinese drag king. She graduated from Royal College of Art. Whiskey's arts practice engage with broadly defined political issues covering a range of related topics. from feminism and queer masculinity. Also, she thus works on stereotypical projections of Chinese Asian identity and the reflection on consumerism. As an artist curator, Whiskey launched, led, curated, and performed in Queering Now in 2020. Queering Now is a curatorial program amplifying marginalized voices of the queer Chinese/Asian diaspora in the Western context. Also, she hopes that she can unite the Chinese Asian diaspora artists and build a new community. Currently, she is teaching at the Royal College of Art. She is also a guest lecturer at the Sotheby's Institute of Art, Chelsea College of Art, and Bath School of Art. Whiskey has been involved in feminist and LGBTQ activism in China since 2011. She contributed to and performed in For Vagina's Sake, which is the original version of the Vagina monologues. And in 2013, she co-curated Lover Comrades Concert, the first Chinese LGBTQ music festival in China. Now I would like to introduce how this event will progress. Firstly, Whiskey Chow will give a 20-minute presentation, and then we will be able to see Xiao Lu's performance art video, followed by a 20-minute presentation by Xiao Lu. After that, we will have a discussion between the two artists. After all of these, we will have a Q&A session. If you have any question, please send your question to the Q&A column. Please note that the whole event will be recorded. You will be able to see the video from 7th of June to 12th of June. Now let's hand it over to Whiskey. Thank you very much, Xiaofei. So now I will start. Now I will share my screen.
Okay, so Okay,
welcome to my presentation. I would like to share my experience in the past decade, my transition from a queer activist to a queer artist. And also, I hope that I can communicate the issues I care about with audiences from different backgrounds. And Xiaofei has already introduced me, so I won't talk too much about that. The talk will be divided into 3 parts. The first part is about my activist experience in China and the main projects I did, as well as how it influenced my present art creations. The second part will be about my practice in Western contemporary art, mainly performance, and also some other forms I will also introduce. The last part is very short. It's more like a question. It's questioning what art can actually do, what it can actually bring us. So from my perspective, I think art is creating a necessary space for the marginalized, unheard voice. Also, I think art will provide a different imagination. So let me first introduce the main project I did in China. As Xiaofei has already introduced, this is the Chinese version of the Vagina monologue. It was premiered in 2013. 2013 was the 10-year anniversary of the introduction of the original China monologue into China. So we were doing this work to pay an homage to the original work. And also, we wanted to localize this work to make it echo more with the gender issues in China. So then at that time, our team decided to use the technique of Eve Ensler, but we rewrote the script and collected the stories related to gender in China with an attempt to cover different age, sexual orientation, and class, and women's experiences in different contexts. So we hope to present how the body of a Chinese woman, it can be born or cannot be born. During her life experience, she would face many different conflicts or even some trauma. We also wanted to tell the story of marriage and reproduction. In the Chinese context, sex education was something that the public would find ashamed of. Then in this context, how do these women would follow their life journey? So all of the stories were real. We collected these stories by in-depth interview and translate them into a theater performance. Now you can see a young version of me. I can never go back to that period of time. This scene, as you can see on the screen, is about the violence between lesbian intimate relationship. We want to portray different stories with different independent storylines on the stage. We also wanted to expand the inclusivity because the original version of Vagina Monologue was questioned for not including transgender women's experience. But in our version, we also included that part, as well as bisexual women's experience. And in addition to pain, we also praise pleasure, because in public, it's a taboo for women to talk about how much they enjoy sex in public. But we want to break this kind of taboo. The experience for me is very important since it influenced my art creations afterwards, because it taught me how to use a creative approach to engage in the issues that I care about, while opening up a space for communication and delivering our emotions. I don't think the emotions are like personal. I think they are closely connected with the society. We do this because we care. So it's a very influential part of my life. Now, part two. Before I introduce my works, I would like to firstly summarize the techniques or approach or how I observe the world when I was doing these artworks. In my works, you'll be able to see a strong sense of intersectionality. I think as a queer artist, queer identity is only a part of my self-identification. In my works, you'll be able to see how the queer identity intersect with other issues, because I think the queer identity cannot be isolated, cannot be seen in an isolating way. So I also discuss racism and respond to Western centrism. And also I question my Chinese identity and other political issues. These were all intersected with the queer identity. At the same time, I am very clear about my identity and positionality. I am in the Western hierarchy, social hierarchy and structure. What's my position? I am very clear about that. So basically, I'm not a white person, I'm not straight, and I am not biologically male. Also, I also have this kind of queer masculinity. This kind of body is actually otherized. And such a position, I think, is a starting point, a foundation for all of my works, because I have to face these issues in a Western society and context. So I've talked a lot already. Now I would like to introduce my works. The first work is called King in Your Eyes. Chinese audiences might be more familiar with the imageries because this is obviously a face. The makeup from Chinese opera. But then why would I introduce this piece of work first? Because I think it's very important. It's not because I did that Chinese opera makeup on my face, but I want to emphasize that I used this work to challenge the Western definition of drag king. And also I want to interrogate the tradition of Western drag king and see how it describes and depicts ideal masculinity. As you can see, the face of the drag king is actually very round. And look at the shades and highlight. Maybe this symbol is too familiar for Chinese audiences, so they wouldn't realize it. But if you put this image under the gaze of a Westerner, this face would be really feminine. So the so-called femininity generated is felt because it doesn't fall into the category as defined by Western masculinity. So I use this face in the context of Western drag king culture to challenge how it is defined. So can we call this a drag king? I was also doing some research on the trajectory or development of drag king in the Western context. Of course, there's an element of performativity in queer identity. The performance was done in a queer bar. So you will see some lip sync performances and some activities to please the audiences. But if I got rid of all of these entertaining elements and use a different makeup way, can it still be called drag king? So I was trying to decolonize and challenge the Western-centric definition of drag king. Because if you actually go to see a show, you can see how they do the makeup and how you tie up your breasts, how you use the shading to contour your muscle and your pecs. And also on the face, you can see how they use the highlight or shading. They were trying to recreate the face of a white man. I think this is highly racialized. I have a body as an Asian queer, which made me feel distanced from all of those Western drag king performances. Therefore, I brought my own cultural symbols and cultural identities into these. But at the same time, I'm also questioning my own cultural identities. You can see this. This is a video. It's very short, but I won't play it here. You can see I put my hand on my crotch. I was taking a turnip out of the crotch and cut it into half. And I'll mix it with some pork and spring onions. And I added some salt to make them into dumplings. I also invited audiences to make dumplings with me. But why does the mustache disappear here? Because I took it off. After I took it off, I dissected it and I chopped it up. And I mixed it with the filling of the dumpling. So Western people's stereotypes of us, for example, the Chinese opera symbol and Chinese food and cultural product are all consumed. But how I approach these ingredients turned it into something inedible. So in the end, some audiences gave the dumplings back to me because they can't eat it. They felt a bit awkward. It was indeed my intention. I wanted to make something that cannot be eaten. I think it's also a resistance towards the consumerism. The next work is called Unhomeliness. It was done in Tate Modern in 2018. It's a live performance on site plus video. You can also see many so-called Chinese symbols. I did this work because of the theme of intersectionality. So my queerness as well as the identity as an immigrant. I used this white luggage. It was the luggage I used when I traveled from China to the UK. So I think it has this connotation. All of these videos, short footage, were all collected from Chinatown in London. As an immigrant, born and raised in China, when I was doing this work, I actually felt that it was a bit like magical surrealism when I was collecting these footage in Chinatown, because you see a pile of these Chinese symbols. It's a burst out of the so-called Chineseness. So this kind of piling up of Chinese symbols, what's the purpose of it? What audience does it target? I didn't even see that kind of image accumulation back at home. I think you can't really see this kind of thing in China, the rainbow flag side by side with the lantern, because in the Western context, people see the lantern as a Chinese symbol. But how would the Chinese symbol be connected with the rainbow flag, which delivers the identity diversity? But you can see that at the bottom of the flag is the famous gay bar. It creates another sense of belonging. If the production of this kind of belonging is successful, then the audiences might feel, oh, this is home. That would be my home. by seeing this identity diversity symbol, then they would go into the bar. So I think these all had capitalist connotations in it, and they use symbols to attract potential consumers. This is all just a thought starting from my immigrant identity. But still, I think Chinatown is a very important site for older generation immigrants. But as a newcomer, I observe these with a lot of questions. The next work is called Purely Beautiful New Era. And you can see a king here is also the face of that drag king I did. After drag king turns into a symbol, it can be extended and used in some other media. It doesn't have to be used in a very specific way. But so when it turns into a symbol, it can be used in some other works of mine. And also, you can see that thing that looks like ham, but is actually not. These are some landmarks in metropolitans in China. For example, the Expo architecture in Shanghai and Guangzhou Tower, Canton Tower. They look like meat. So in a 3D effect, they look a bit like ham. These landmarks are all very modern, and the drag king is spitting out these landmarks. I did this work in 2017 in Victoria and Albert Museum. So I basically lifted the weights for an hour in the corner. In this work, I was talking about how an individual carries the burden or was coerced to imagine the nationalist narrative and how people were forced the so-called dream. This is a dream imposed upon individuals. I didn't really try to suggest or imply anything or imply what country it is, because I think this is very common now. I think it happens in the UK too. So I want to talk about how an individual has to satisfy the dream of the place where one inhabits. Is actually not one's own dream, but we all have to contribute to that kind of dream. Okay, next. This work is called Macho. I talked about intersectionality in addition to queerness and queer identity. I was also thinking about an Asian with queer masculinity, how it would be positioned in the intersectionality of race, gender, and class in the Western context. The Asian body, no matter in gay or lesbian relationships or heterosexual relationships, the Asian body was desexualized and undesired. It's an abandoned body. So I was considering that position of the body and questioning the racialized hierarchy behind that. Because, of course, in this system, the most desired body is a white body. But, and also I discuss more general political issues. This work is not directly related to queerness. You can see the passport picture sticked on my face. So I was thinking about using passport photos, which has a very strong function and purpose to discuss immigrants and borderline. So how many faces do I need to stick on my own face to look like myself? Because this passport photo is not a usual photo. It connects with your right of mobility and your rights as a citizen. How you actually look doesn't matter anymore. It's all flat and digitalized into a digital bank. So I was thinking about the bigger power structure behind all of these. It's still very related to our present life, I think. I did this a few years ago, but if you put this work, say, into the context of Brexit or during the time of the pandemic, all the countries are closing down their borderline. And how would you perceive individual mobility and digitalization in these contexts? So it's not an outdated work. And the last work, I brought some Chinese queer myth into this work because there's a Chinese god called Tu-er fairy in Chinese myth. So I hope to bring in some related Chinese queer icons into this work to discuss the desperation of queer in the present life. Because speaking of queer, many people are celebrating who we are, celebrating our identity, but the oppression and trauma still exist. So I used this work to challenge the domination of heterosexuality. This is a new work. I'm just briefly mentioning it. You must everywhere wonder. It will be released at 7:30 p.m. On 15th of June. This is a work combining reality and digital techniques. If you use the digital method to reconfigure our body, I would find that it gives me more freedom to explore a queer body, queer time, and queer imagination. So please do come to this event. Now I would like to briefly mention this, but maybe I don't have enough time. So in addition to my own works, I also did many different other practice during and before the pandemic. I also did some participatory workshop, and I worked with other artists who care about the society. Queering Now, for me, is also creating a space for unheard or marginalized voice, but some of them might have very excellent work. So I think this kind of practice is closely related to my activist experience. I am a member of them. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Whiskey. And we will talk about your work more in the Q&A session and in the panel discussion later. Now we can see the video of Xiao Lu's works.
人生命它有年龄限制，年龄限制的话，就是到一定的时候，因为我到医院咨询，44岁是他们接受人工受精的最后一个年限，所以这个时间的紧迫性也产生了这个在这么短的情况下产生这个作品的一个原始动机。你们任何人都可以拿完以后自己放。
比企图版男性工具化，
就是嘛，而且他还
所以男性们在挣扎。
肖卢女士，你是否愿意嫁给自己为妻？忠于自己的想法，无论海枯石烂，无论沧海桑田，永远和自己在一起，你愿意吗？大声地告诉我们。
我愿意。
今天他结婚了。
What is? You make me drunk.
来了。
现在请肖卢老师
Now, please, Xiao Lu,
来开始您的讲演。
you can start your talk.
我们还听不到您的声音。
Please unmute yourself.
听得见了吗？
现在可以听得到了。
Now we can hear you.
大家好，我是肖鲁。
Hello, everyone. I am Xiao Lu.
受那个
It is a pleasure to be invited by Whiskey Chow to be a part of the Queering Now project. The talk I will do today is called The Transformation from Unwittingly Political to Consciously Political. I would like to briefly introduce my background. I went to school during 1979 to 1988. 1979 was the dawn of Chinese cultural enlightenment after the Cultural Revolution, and that was the first year when the Fine Arts School affiliated to China Central Academy of Fine Arts to resume student admissions after the Cultural Revolution. The library that had been banned for 10 years reopened, and I was able to read John Christopher by Roman Roland, the autobiography by Isadora Duncan, and The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. It was really something very appealing, attractive to us because we couldn't read any of those in the Cultural Revolution. And at that time, we could buy some Western philosophers' works in Xinhua bookshop. If you could recite some quotes by Sartre, Nietzsche, Freud, or Schopenhauer, that was something that you can show off. You would try to slip out some of the quotes when you chat with people. People didn't have house or cars at that time. It was fashionable to talk about philosophy. I think these kind of thoughts hugely influenced young people in the 1980s. So they went on the street to protest in 1989. I think the 1980s was like a vacuum of idealists era. People had low salary, and the artists didn't know they could sell their work. There was no bar or cafeteria on the street. There was no supermarket. We would buy some peanut and just drink boiled water and talked about philosophy. Maybe we didn't really understand those fully, but young people liked showing off. So we would always like to talk about philosophers. I think 1989 was the transitional point of Chinese society. The economic wave after that evoked Chinese people's desire for money. And then people all just talked about house and cars, and branding branding products became a fashion of young people. But I left China in 1989, so I didn't really experience that ecstasy of economic opening. So when I returned to China in 1997, I found that the old friends were all talking about cars and houses at that time. So this is me and my classmates. I was the only girl in the class. There was relatively very few female in university at that time. So you've already watched my performance video. I would like to introduce some of my works. My early works mostly focused on personal emotions. For example, dialogue, as you can see here. The upper right hand is sperm, and the lower right hand is called a wedlock. no matter how they were interpreted by other people, my initial motivation were all my personal emotions. And afterwards, I started to discuss more broader issues. For example, this one, and human, about the relationship between human and Chinese culture. And here you can see money laundering, polar, and holy water. I think money laundering is about the financial and political topics, and polar is about the freedom and resistance of humanity. Holy water talks about the conflicts between humans and religions. And coil is talking about the oppression and suffocation brought by the Chinese contemporary society. The big photo on the left-hand side is called Tides. So it was a reflection work from 1989 to 2019. All of the 30 years, there were 30 bamboo poles. It was my own reflection of my 3 decades of life. And at the lower bottom side, it is called Skewed, about the anti-extradition law amendment bill movement in Hong Kong. Now, specifically, I would like to first talk about dialogue. On February 1989, I fired a gunshot at China Avant-Garde in National Museum of China, which created a controversial work. This work participated in collection displays, performers and participant by Tate Modern in 2018. And now it is also a part of Democracy's exhibition at Tate Liverpool. So maybe some of the friends in the UK have already known dialogue. I told Whiskey that I hope you would know some of my other works. So you can see the installation. A woman and a man are calling. There's a phone hanging in between, implying that they can't really communicate with each other. And the final gunshot related to my personal emotional experience at the time. I feel depressed. After the gunshot, the museum was closed down. So you can see the upper right-hand side, the museum was closed. And the next day, it was on the 6th of February, 1989. New York Times reported this event with the title, "Police in China Close Art Show After Artists Shoot Her Work." And after that, domestic and international media all reported this work, which pushed the work to the fore. This work, which stemmed from my emotions, had always vibrated strongly with politics and the society. The keywords, sensitive keywords of the work, for example, 1989, Beijing, dialogue, gunshot. All of these words echoed the June 4th student movements. At that time, the students were oppressed by the government when they demand conversation with the government at the Tiananmen Square. Therefore, in Wikipedia, you can see this work is called the first gunshot of the Tiananmen incident. In 1980s in China, there was no sex education. Sex before marriage was called messing around. The experience of sexual assault under the ignorance and unawareness of sex once made me drown in an emotional maelstrom. And it was the initial purpose to make this work. When I faced the public media, I was scared and I had a twisted mentality which caused the loss of authorship. I could only face the work until 2004, I wrote a novel called Dialogue to describe my mental process. Hong Kong University Press published this work, so if you are interested, you can buy. People always say you avoid what you fear. All these years, I wouldn't dare to face the work Dialogue. Was actually my fear to face my Me Too experience. If you face the fear disappears. And the work Sperm has been called a feminist work. I accept any kind of interpretation of this work, but still I would like to talk about how I created this work. After I wrote that novel, I felt an emotional loss. So I really wanted a child. At the time, Changzheng Studio asked me to participate in a project. And I wanted a child. I was looking at sperm banks. So that's why I did this job, did this work. Wedlock was also related to my specific emotional experience. I married myself. My longing for and disappointment in marriage formed the theme of the work. In Sperm, you just saw, I was actively asking for men's sperm. Men were active. They were asked to donate their sperm. So, when I was doing the project, I had a lot of conversation with men because the work lasted for 3 days. And from these conversations, I think the conflictual point was like what Lu Jie has said, you use men as a tool, and men were struggling. And after I did this project, someone donated sperm for me, and I had IVF, but it didn't succeed. Intuition and perception are two of my creative pathways. As the works accumulated, you can see a clearer clue that I changed from one concerning her own emotions to stepping towards the society and turning into a person with social awareness and political attitude. The other day, I was talking to Whiskey, and she told me she did her work with a female awareness. And I said, maybe it's related to your experience in Guangzhou with Ai Xiaoming. I also know Ai Xiaoming. Maybe it was because of that and because of your experience participating in the theater of making of vagina monologue. So you had this awakening time at a very early age, but my experience was totally different. On the first day I went to the fine art school, the principal told us, we don't allow relationship here. So in our chit-chat between our female dormants, we talked about how were children actually born. Do women just get pregnant by touching men? I remember at the first year, several men, boys and girls went to the Great Wall, and then we were laughed at by other people. So, and then later in the 4 years at that high school, men and women, girls and boys didn't really talk. That was the environment during my adolescence, the ignorance and sexual oppression, which caused my fear. So my pursuit in artistic work was to get rid of the performativity. I want to pursue something real in an unconscious state, but it is actually a conscious pursuit. For example, in Drunk and Holy Water, I was drinking alcohol. Normally, people would have some kind of disguise, but when you get drunk, you could see in the performance before, you will see people have interesting activities and behaviors. So at that time, people's masks disappear, and our body and soul turn into something more real. I don't like repeating my own works. A new work has many unknown potentials and possibilities which will trigger my motivations and passion. Sometimes the spontaneous part in a performance is the most intriguing part. For example, Paula. Before that, I didn't realize I would bleed. When I was cracking the ice, the knife just hit my hand, so I bled. We didn't expect that. So after it happened, I thought, well, when I saw the blood shedding from the edge, I got really excited. I thought there were two types of people. One, they would faint when they see blood, but I got very excited when I saw the blood. Then this performance turned into a real scenario that challenged the extremity of life. Something happening on site was very interesting. So maybe the blood added a lot of aura to the work itself. Many times my intuition went before a concept when I was creating art pieces. Intuition was something that you feel right about at this moment, which includes all of your spirits. Unconscious, subconscious, or conscious, sometimes it's very hard to separate these three. I think they are interchangeable and interdependent. When I was making dialogue, I didn't have any political implications, but the relationship between this work and society has influenced my mindset unconsciously, especially if you are doing work in China, you're always restricted in terms of how you express, and these conflicts always form the resistance in my work. For example, Coil, it was rejected by 2 private galleries in China. In the end, it was done in my own studio. The whole process of the creation, like getting rejected and me trying to get it done, and me being trapped in the acrylic space, and I was suffocated by the smoke by Mark Sebastian, echoed with the contemporary status of Chinese society. Skew in 2019 was related to Hong Kong at that time. In June 2019, I went to Victoria Park in Hong Kong for the first time, and it was also my first time to attend the June 4th memorial event. I was shocked and I felt ashamed. We saw video of people protesting in Tiananmen Square in 1989. People were singing Blood-Stained Glory. It was really striking for me because June 4th was a taboo in China. Many young people never knew about June 4th, but I believe in Hong Kong, no one doesn't know about June 4th. From the photos I took, you can see their eyes look really pious. And from 1989 to 2019, the Hong Kong people had done that memorial activity for 30 years. After that, I went back to Beijing, and then I have been observing the Hong Kong anti-extradition bill movement. In September of that year, I had a solo exhibition in Hong Kong. So I wanted to do something for Hong Kong people. And on 12th September 2019, I made Skew. After that, I participated in the protest events. You saw in my videos, some Hong Kong people went on the street. It was real. I took all of the footage and edited them into the work Skew. For me, performance art is a representation of a special life status. From dialogue in 1989 to Skew in 2019, no matter it's about personal or social issues. I think the resistance aspect has been going through in all of my works. A few years ago, when I was doing an interview, I said that my attention and sensitivity to the current society is reflected in my work. In Hong Kong, I asked a young person, why do you go on the street? She said that only when Hong Kong is good, can I have a good life. I was surprised at her awareness as a citizen. She told me that that was the education she got, but this is something that I didn't have. I think it becomes my spiritual wealth of my whole life. Let me quote the saying by Hong Kong people: you do not protest because there's hope. Hope exists because you protest. You have to face it, not to avoid it. It was like how I faced the work dialogue. You have to face your true self and stick to the principle of free speech, free expression. And in the end, I would like to say thank you to Queering Now for inviting me. And I would like to say thank you to Chinese Arts Now and Center for Contemporary East Asian Cultural Studies from University of Nottingham. Thank you. Thank you very much, Xiao Lu, for your wonderful presentation. Now, Whiskey, please turn on your camera and microphone.
Hello.
Yes, I am here.
OK， 好，你在。首先我想就
Okay, firstly, I would like to talk about the intersectionality and communication between different generations. Although the two of you were born in different time, you share many similarities in your works. For example, your open attitude towards gender diversity and fluidity, and also experience as a diaspora and immigrant. Xiao Lu is a pioneer of feminist and female art in China, and I think your work inspired people to discover the queerness and queer energy in your work. So I want to first ask Whiskey Chow, what do you expect when you invited Xiao Lu to join this project? And I would also like to ask Xiao Lu, what did you think about when you got invited? Thank you. I think this is an important question. My understanding of queer is more in a general sense. I think queer spirit is more important. Queer spirit includes being forever fluid and questioning the norms, as well as resisting domination and dictatorship. You can see the works of mine and Xiao Lu using different ways to have a conversation with different kinds of powers. Although we use our body as a material to finish the work, the essence of the works were the materiality, corporeality. As a curator, I don't choose people who are homosexual because I think queer is not just about your sexual orientation, it's your spirit to question. So when I was choosing artists, of course I admire their work from the perspective of an artist, and I also admire their personality. But more importantly, I don't hope Queering Now would become something narrow, and that I don't hope it only allows people to participate if you are falls into the column of certain sexual orientations. I think the similarity between Xiao Lu and I are our belief I think this is what connects us. So personally, I didn't see Xiao Lu's art as a kind of queer art because I don't think you can categorize her works. Privately, we are good friends. It's very clear to me that her works are only loyal to her innermost beings. So I think the loyalty to yourself and forever questioning and not being afraid of asking a question or challenge something is more is closer to what I understand as a queer spirit. This is why I invited Xiao Lu. And also we're from different generations. And we also focus on making performance art. Interestingly, was I found I was born in the year when Xiao Lu made dialogue. So after I did my presentation, I also want to say to all of you, maybe you can find out my age now. I think this overlap is very interesting, but more importantly is our similar belief and faith that connects us. Thank you, Whiskey. Then, Xiao Lu, what do you think? I knew Whiskey in Guangzhou in 2014. After that, I went to the UK twice and I met her twice in the UK. I would send her some of my works and she would send me some of her works. We always talked about our thoughts and ideas. So I think we are really good friends. At the beginning, she said she wanted to invite me to come to the UK in April, but then because of the pandemic, we can't travel, so it's all online now. So queering now is something that only knew recently. Before in our conversation, I didn't really know anything about this project. So I think there's a mutual trust in our friendship. So I just said yes. And I think queering now or something queer doesn't block our conversation. So you are both born and raised in China, and you went to a Western country at a very young age. So I think Whiskey, your works, especially the unhomeliness at Tate Modern, you expressed how you feel when you saw the combination of Chinese traditional symbols and gay liberation symbols in Chinatown. You said there is a sense of dislocation and even a sense of dissociation, Freudian sense of dissociation. So I would like to ask about the identity of or the role of your body. And also I saw that your mouth was confined by something. I was curious about how you present that sense of dislocation. And also, Xiao Lu, you said that you left China after 1989. So I want to know, in Sydney or some other countries, how do you feel?
Whiskey,
Whiskey, you want to go first? Okay. About unhomeliness, the role of my body, as well as how the body delivers or presents dislocation. I think in the field of performance art, we would commonly talk about we're doing real performance when we are doing it. It's not fake. For example, in Polar of Xiao Lu's, it was real blood. You wouldn't use pig blood or a bottle of ketchup to create a flowery visual effect. And also, bleeding was an accident for her. So there were many accidents in a live performance. I think the materiality and realness were highly pursued in live performances because we don't want to act or perform to, and this realness was what made these works meaningful. And the body in unhomeliness is the same. I often think your body is the arena of your personal experience and stories. Although in terms of time, you only have the immediate presence, but the past leaves traces on your body. So the meaning of this body, from my perspective, I think, for example, if you ask a white straight man to do a same work, the meaning of that work would completely change. That's why this work has to be done by me, by such a body. If I find some other queer Asian immigrant, does it work? Maybe the connotation will look somewhat similar, but there is a power dynamic in it because the concept of the work is brought up by me, and I would be directing that queer, so it will create a kind of power dynamic, power tension. These are intricate, but anyways, I think body is an essential part that formulates the concept or connotations in my work. And it's a way for me to create the completeness of my concept. And also the dislocation comes from my own feelings. Okay, thank you. Xiao Lu, can you talk about your feelings of at first traveling abroad and then going back to Beijing and then traveling abroad again? Now I have just come back to a foreign country. In 1989, I was not feeling well at that time. So maybe I would answer it differently. I could talk about my main works. Except for Ties were done in Sydney. All the rest the majority of them were done in different parts of the world. The work I done in Brussels, I felt that the interaction between me and the audience, as you could see in the video, it was really good. But doing performance in China, I think performance art in China is something very marginal and peripheral. So only people in the art circle would go watch your performance. Then the audiences actually understand you because they are well-informed and educated. So when I was doing Polar, they saw me bleeding. They didn't try to stop me or anything. So I think mostly I did many of my work in the art circle. The audiences were quite cool, quite understanding and cooperative. You talk about sin, the work sin, because in this work, a drunk the work drunk, you said that the audience passed you some alcohol. They fed you alcohol until you got really drunk. And you said you talked to the audiences in English. People would think maybe this work contains the implication of power dynamics of an Asian in a Western context. But maybe they misinterpreted the work. So I want to ask, when you were doing that work, how did you configure it? This piece was made at a turbulent emotional status. So I really wanted to get drunk. That was my initial motivation. If you watch the whole video of that art piece, you could see it's very my change from sober to being drunk. After I got drunk, I started speaking English, but before, when I was sober, I was speaking Chinese. So the cooperation of the audiences is very important. And the next day, the curator told me that the work was really striking because I really invested myself into the creative process and it was real. I really devote myself into it. I wanted to find that real condition. So I got some feedback and they told me they had never seen anything that striking. Okay, thank you. I would like to remind the audiences that you can send your questions into the Q&A session. And now we can try to answer your questions. And also, I want to invite two artists. Maybe Whiskey, do you have anything to say? Like, how do the audiences react or respond to your artworks? I think then there's a difference between Western audiences or Chinese audiences because I only did a few performances in China, not the drag king one. Of course, if I did a drag king one in China, it would got a totally different interpretation. The same thing, the same work might have different connotations in terms of what it tried to deliver and challenge. I want to talk about how the Western audiences respond to my works. I think, why would I curate queering now? It's because of my minority identity, as well as the intersectionality of our identities. When we were invited by some institutions, they would have a hidden expectation. But also we have to look at what their theme is. But anyway, our identity, our race, in the Western context, we don't really need to anything. Our race will start performing itself. Then there's this performativity innate in our body in this context. So when I got invited, maybe they would expect something. They want to say something Chinese. They have this expectation, but they don't make it explicit. I will also have to know how to cope with this kind of expectation, because before, when I was introducing my works, I said that I refuse to be consumed. But refusing to be consumed doesn't mean you don't want to collaborate. It's just how I respond to their expectations. Of course, I know in the eyes of some Western audiences, maybe I am only a cultural symbol. They don't really know the specific direction or my inspirations in these works. But I'm also aware of that I am a symbol. I am a symbol that resists to be gazed at, and I gaze back. And I think this reverse of gaze is to is a way to empower myself. I am talking very generally, but basically this is what all of my works contain. And I think a very important issue is how we deal with our cultural identity, about this Chineseness, the influence of the cultural heritage in Chinese culture. How much do you want to preserve? It's all related to individual artists. So I have been trying to break through and find a new way, a critical way to re-explore the cultural elements of my cultural identity as represented in these works. Okay, thank you, Whiskey. Now, there's a question coming from Ting Ting Wei. She said that in Xiao Lu's work, there's a lot of pain, trauma, struggle, resistance, and power. And there's a lot of deconstruction of queerness in Whiskey's work. Can you also share in the art field, do you also experience the marginalization because of your gender, race? Because in her experience, the art field is very patriarchal. And also Xiao Lu talked about the authorship problem. And there's sexual harassment incidents among artists. Do you have anything to respond to that? Xiao Lu, do you want to go first? Performance art is, of course, marginalized in China. It's very hard for you to keep doing that. So, of course, it is marginal. Female artists are also, of course, marginalized in the patriarchal world. You mentioned authorship of my work. I would like to recommend you to read my novel published by Hong Kong University Press, because it will be too long if I talk about that here. It gives you a very clear idea of the authorship issue. That work is published bilingually. So I think for me, why I did a lot of works about emotions in the former half of my life. I don't know what art is for other people, but for me, art is reflects something struggling. It reflects my struggle, something that I cannot let down, and my trauma. You can see these traces left in my works. Because I need a special stage or a special feeling or condition to do works. You can see how my personal condition change in my work. I'm not like some other artists who use a concept as the foundation of their work. I think the feelings form the skeleton of my works. So if how I feel changes, if the world changes, my work would change too. So you can see the pain in my works from an earlier age. Maybe I had more personal struggles or pains. But now maybe you can still see resistance or struggle in the works. But I think what I resist is broader than the personal level. No, I just want to say that before we were talking and you said that the work dialogue was given many different interpretations, but no theorist tried to ask what your feeling was when you were doing that work. So female artists were voiceless. And the Me Too movement in China, it got spread out, and then we look back on your work dialogue. We can still feel that it's very meaningful in terms of female resistance. Yes, of course, I did have my problems and difficulties about authorship. I also showed you how New York Times reported this work. At first, at the exhibition catalog, on the name list, it was all seen as my work. But then it got confused and mistaken by someone else later. But it was my fault that I didn't clarify. I tried to stay away from the art circle for a very long time, and for a few years I didn't really do anything, which might be the reason why that issue emerged. When I was struggling for my authorship, I faced many barriers. People told me that I was belittling a great work because it was too important for that exhibition in 1989, and they would think a great work should have a great starting point. But I said it was all done out of my personal emotions. This was unacceptable for many male artists, male curators. They say a sublimating artwork should have a really great motivation at first, but you were kind of belittling that. So now our webinar will stop at 1:45. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise. And Ruth has a question for Whiskey. She wants to know that in your, did you learn anything from Xiao Lu's work? And also how do her works influence your own creation? I'll answer Tingting's question first, but I'll do it briefly. I think sometimes being marginalized, I think I have been emphasizing that I know my own position, but being marginalized doesn't mean that you're powerless. Because I think today we can all sit here and I have an opportunity to present my works on different platforms and in a foreign country. This is already a privilege. Comparing with many people who can't use creative work to find a voice, or people that do not have this language to communicate their ideas. I am already someone with privilege. And the intersectionality in my identity may be true. It makes me a less powerful person in the Western society, but I don't want to make this power dynamic a selling point. I don't want to say, oh, I am really miserable because I'm being marginalized. I think the intersectionality of identities can actually be a connecting point. I mentioned a project I did before, the workshop that I did with 2 queer artists in America. I asked them to introduce the project of activism and art. It's called In Plain Sight. In plain sight means you see but you ignore it. That project in the end included 80 artists, and they came up with a very straightforward political appeal. So their purpose was to actually influence the result of the election, at least partially. This is a concept of the so-called world queer citizen. Among the 80 artists they work with, they have different experiences. Some of them might be Mexican immigrants, some of them might be Japanese immigrants. They have different families. They have intergenerational trauma because of the change of the society and the history. So the intersectionality of the identity becomes a connecting point that connects different issues. When you are so those people who did not get resources, the voice unheard, the groups ignored, the communities looked down upon, can be connected because of this kind of intersectionality. So then we start from there to create a space to amplify the voice unheard. So I think this is how we can reconsider the issue of so-called marginalization. Sorry, I forgot your next question, but I think I did answer Tingting's question. Okay, thank you, Whiskey. Thank you, Xiao Lu, for your wonderful discussion and presentations. It's really inspiring. And we are living in a world of isolation and oppression. This dialogue, this conversation is very meaningful. And all the audiences, please also pay attention to the Chinese Arts Now's website. We will have videos of artworks on the website. Thank you again. Now let's conclude the event. Thank you. Thank you.